Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Tom DeVito, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer with Bloom Shapiro, and will be serving as your moderator for today's session. This is really the first conference call that we are having, and anticipate having several more updates and developments present themselves. This, of course, is a very fluid situation, and we have teams of people responsible for collecting, analyzing, summarizing, and certainly disseminating information as it becomes available. Before I get into introducing our speakers, I'd like to address one question that has come through from several of our clients regarding how Bloom Shapiro will ensure that its operations will continue without impacting client services. Yesterday, our CEO, Joe Cass, sent out an email to all our clients extending his hope that you and your team stay healthy and safe, and explaining the status of our operations. I just want to take a moment and read to you a couple of paragraphs that specifically address this and what our plans are and the status of our operations. In accordance with the guidance of the CDC and state officials, Bloom Shapiro will be closing its offices starting on March 18th through March 31st. We will be monitoring the situation closely and will communicate any updates to you immediately. We feel that this action is necessary as we all do our part to continue to contain the spread of the virus and hopefully lessen its effects on our society and our economy. We at Bloom Shapiro have the technology and the infrastructure necessary to conduct business securely, remotely, and seamlessly. With the exception of physically being on site, our team is prepared to provide you the same level of communication and service that we have been privileged to deliver to you in the past. Over the last years, we have been investing heavily in our infrastructure and technology, enabling us to really perform work from anywhere at any time. That technology has been tested on a number of different occasions, certainly with several of the snowstorms that we have experienced. So we're real confident that we shouldn't have any blips whatsoever. I trust that all of you have been receiving updates from us regarding several topics, including how to access our electronic document submission application. If you haven't and wish to learn more, please visit our website. On the landing page there, you'll find a link with detailed instructions on how to do so. So before we jump in, just a couple of logistics items. First, several of our participants are joining us remotely, as you would expect, and several are here in person. We typically host these sessions in a more studio-like environment with participants in very close proximity using high-fidelity microphones. Given the guidance we've all received, we've moved to a large area using a speaker system, and we're all observing social distancing recommendations. I share this with you only so that you understand that we may experience some pauses during the Q&A as we kind of reposition ourselves, some background noise as we do so. We've collected many of the questions from this group and our clients in general, and have organized those into buckets and themes, which we plan on addressing today. I think that's it from me, Jared. Do you want to cover some of the logistics for today's as to how people could submit questions?
Sure. For today's webinar, all phones have been placed on mute, so if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the questions panel in the GoToWebinar application, and we'll be sitting here taking a look through all of your questions and getting to them as time permits.
Thank you, Jared. Now let me introduce our panel. First is Joe Feehan. Joe's a partner in our tax department. He has almost 20 years of experience providing an array of tax services for a diverse group of our clients, really ranging from small privately held businesses to Fortune 100 companies, real extensive knowledge in state and local tax planning, as well as just overall federal tax issues. Also joining us is Jen Marecki. She's a director with over 20 years of experience in the HR space. Prior to joining Bloom, Jen had her own consulting practice and focused on a number of different HR-related areas. She's filled a variety of roles over her career, including a broker, staffing and recruitment manager, compliance leader, and employee and labor relations. So Jen will be sharing some of the items as it relates to your employees. Frank Nemia. Frank leads our risk advisory service. He has extensive experience in financial and IT advisory services and certainly risk management, and has a lot of expertise there. Frank and his group focus on all aspects of mitigating risk for our clients. Michael Pelletier is here with us today. Mike serves as our Chief Innovation Officer. He also leads our Technology Advisory Group. He consults on a wide range of business and industry issues related to technology, strategy, direction, enterprise, and solution architecture, as well as cloud computing and digital transformation. So thanks for being with us, Mike. Frank Rudowitz is also on the phone. Frank's a partner and leader of our Bloom's litigation evaluation practice. Frank has more than 30 years of experience conducting domestic and international investigation for fraud, forensic, asset tracking, and other litigation-related matters. He's also our resident celebrity in that he's appeared on NBC Dateline and Forensic Files for a lot of the work that he did while working at the FBI. David Sun is with us. David's a partner with our advisory service group. He has deep expertise in the cybersecurity area, responding to data breach and privacy incidents, including ransomware attacks, internal employee malfeasance, and government agency investigations. And that's both on the public and the private side. And then we also have Jeff Ziplo. Jeff is a partner from our risk advisory service group, and he has significant experience working with organizations to assess their internal controls and related business operations. Helps develop recommendations to mitigate risk overall. So we have a wide variety of professionals joining us for today. As I said, we've taken many of your questions and grouped those based on their obviously topic and the themes. First and foremost that came through, and I think I'd like to point this in the direction of Joe Feehan. Joe, on March 14th, the House passed a sweeping COVID-19 package, the Families First Coronavirus Act, which the Senate will hopefully be voting on this week. Joe, can you provide us with a summary of what's in the bill and how it stands today? And then I have a couple of follow-up questions from the audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending today. Again, I'm Joe Feehan, a tax partner here with Bloom. I thought I would start off with just quickly recapping the status of the bill that passed on Saturday morning in the House. It passed by a vote of 363 to 40. It's gone to the Senate. The Senate will likely not vote on this until Wednesday. The Senate, when they vote on it, if they do an up or down vote, it'll go to the president for signature. If they make changes, it'll likely go back to the House, and we might not see action until around the 23rd. Before we get into what's in the bill, HR 6201, or the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, I just want to discuss briefly what's not in the bill and what we may see that might follow shortly thereafter. So a lot of you may have heard about a payroll tax cut. That was not in the bill. Also, there's been a lot of talk about the IRS extending the 4/15 deadline, not only the deadline, but the due date to pay. That will happen separately. We're talking now that might be 3 months. And really, for all of our clients, if they don't extend the time to pay, to make the payments, we're really in no different spot, right? Because we're going to still have to calculate the tax due and whatnot. So that's not in the bill. There's already talk around a third proposal that's going to go out. Remember, Congress did an earlier $8 billion bill to fight the virus. There's been a number of different proposals floating out there. We're not going to go into depth on those, but there's an administration plan of about $850 billion, which would, the centerpiece would be the payroll tax cut. And there would also be, preliminarily, we're talking about $50 billion to help the airlines. Nobody's flying. In the Senate, there's two proposals. Senator Schumer of New York has a proposal, $750. Different priorities in the administration. This would be more aid for hospitals, money for childcare. Separately, Senator Romney of Utah has proposed a $1,000 check for every adult in the country. So those are the types of things that we may see form around a third proposal, which I think will come pretty quickly. So let's dive into HR 6201. I think the centerpiece of this is a mandate for sick leave and family leave. So the first thing it does is for employers with less than 500 employees and for government workers, the bill mandates 2 weeks of sick leave at 100% of normal salary, and it's capped at $511 per day. When I say capped at, companies could do more, but the credits will be capped at that amount. This should cover an employee making $130,000 for 2 weeks. For the family and medical leave, the bill mandates 12 weeks of family and medical leave at 67% of normal salary, and this is capped at $200 per day. This would cover an employee making $75,000 for roughly 12 weeks. This mandates a lot of small businesses don't currently offer sick leave, and we'll get into some of the numbers. So let's get into who can claim it. You have to be employed for at least 30 days to claim it. So somebody who's brand new might have to wait till they're covered for 30 days. Part-time workers are covered. This is interesting because sometimes part-time workers are cut out. You would just prorate it. We're going to talk about bigger companies in a second. Employers with over 500 employees are not covered. That was deliberate by Congress. Based on some numbers we've seen, approximately 90% of people who work for companies with over 500 employees have some sort of sick leave. That's compared with 15% of employees who work for companies with less than 500 employees. Although we'll get into it a little bit, the numbers don't always quite match up. The other group of workers that are covered are independent, self-employed individuals, or the so-called gig employees. So that's different from prior bills, and we'll get into the mechanism of how they'll claim it. So how do you claim this? For sick leave, you don't actually have to contract the coronavirus to claim it. You can claim it under these circumstances. If you're told to quarantine, if you show symptoms, if you've been exposed to a person with the virus, or if you're trying to get a test. The IRS is going to issue guidance, but it's important that we look at the congressional intent. Congress's intent was not to send everybody rushing to doctors to get a doctor's note to claim this. So again, we'll look to the service to issue guidance, but I think it's going to be, broad things. You're being told to stay at home, symptoms, etc. The family leave piece, from everything we've seen on this will be a lot easier to claim. So someone adhering to a quarantine recommendation or caring for an at-risk family member could claim the family leave. And this would include a child whose school or childcare facility is closed due to the coronavirus. A little bit of a word on the larger companies. Again, the bill is silent on employers with over 500 employees. There is also a hardship exemption. Companies with less than 50 employees can apply for a waiver from the paid family leave, not the sick leave. And again, that would be a waiver put into the Department of Labor. And the standard per the legislation is making payments would jeopardize the viability of your business. And again, we're going to need to look to the administration and the Department of Labor for how they intend to interpret this. Some of the differences, as I mentioned, some of the larger companies already have sick leave, but generally the average is only about 8 days versus the mandated 2 weeks in the HR 6201 bill. And also some larger companies. So for example, I saw cited an article, Darden Restaurants, which runs the Longhorn Steakhouse and the Olive Garden. They have sick leave, but they only give you 1 week. So there will be some disparities. And they're thinking maybe about less than 5% of the workforce in this country will be covered under the existing bills or the current one. So really the focus was on focusing on smaller businesses. How are we going to pay for this? So the mechanism is the employer will take a tax credit, and it would be a tax credit applied to the amount they would normally pay for the Social Security taxes. So that's the 6.2%, the employer piece. To the extent the sick leave or medical costs exceed that amount, the amount is refundable. And again, how we determine what is actually sick leave related to coronavirus and other sick leave, again, we're going to need to look to the IRS for guidance. For self-employed individuals and for the gig workers, they get the same benefits and they take this as a tax credit against the amount they pay, and it's also refundable. So how long does this last? This is not a permanent program. These benefits will last for 1 year, and then it would be up to Congress to renew it. I think the reason this passed so overwhelmingly was by putting a limit on it, we were able to say, there are probably a number of politicians who would be opposed to this being permanent. It's a 1 year program. What does it cost? That's unclear, right? So right now there's no price tag on the bill. There are some numbers I'll run through where we go through money that's going to states for nutrition programs and for unemployment insurance, but they didn't put a price tag on this. And as you can see, a lot of the costs are going to be pushed to the employers. They're going to make the payments. They're going to apply for a tax credit refund. Congress also had a mechanism if this draws down the Social Security fund because we aren't making these payments. They're going to have to replenish the funds through other means. And again, no word where that will come. Impact on the deficit. It will have an impact on the deficit, but borrowing costs are at an all-time low right now. We're in a crisis, so the next question would be how quickly do we get cash into the economy? So the mechanism here is the workers would take sick leave and it would be in their next paycheck. The tax credits will be a little more complicated. The taxpayers will need to apply for a refund. The self-employed individuals will be needing to apply for a refund. So that may be a little bit of a lag. And one of the concerns here is, some of the businesses may not have cash on hand to pay because sales are dropping off. So if you have a business, the hospitality business, the restaurant business, you might not have a lot of cash reserves. So again, how are they going to do this? We can talk about, in subsequent plans, small business association loans, states doing programs. We're going to have to figure out how to fill the gap there. So that's the family and medical leave. I'll shift gears right now into funding for nutrition programs. The bill allocates $1 billion, $500 million for the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, with an emphasis on pregnant women and mothers staying at home caring for children. And then another $400 million for temporary food assistance programs, mainly food banks, and $100 million for other nutrition programs. The bill also waives requirements for child nutrition programs, and it also waives the work requirement for SNAP. Currently, in order to get SNAP benefits, you have to be employed a certain number of hours a week. That's going to be waived for the period of this program. The program funds testing. There's both a directive for Medicare, Medicaid, and other federal programs, Veterans Administration, Bureau of Indian Affairs, a whole plethora of federal programs, plus private health plans to fully fund testing. And then the last piece of it is unemployment assistance. There's $1 billion in unemployment benefits in the form of grants for the states. Half of this will be for staffing and technology. The states are going to have to figure out how to get more people to focus on processing unemployment claims and getting the technology up to do so. And then there's going to be a $500 million of grants, again, grants different from loans, which are going to be allocated to states that see a greater than 10% increase in unemployment claims. And then there are going to be interest-free loans to the states to help pay regular unemployment insurance benefits. Again, with more people potentially claiming unemployment insurance, it's going to put a strain on the system to pay out existing benefits. So recently, some major companies did layoffs, particularly retailers. So this might be to cover the gap there. And people who are familiar with the program, states regularly take loans from the federal government to kind of cover shortages in the state unemployment programs. So this is another temporary measure to kind of a stopgap to make sure that we can get the money out to the people who need it. I said we weren't going to talk about state things, but there is it here in Massachusetts. Governor Baker has proposed waiving the waiting period to apply for unemployment insurance benefits. Again, the idea, let's get cash to the people who need it quicker. So that's the high-level summary of the bill. If we want, we can take a pause here, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Yeah, Joe, well, first there was a question, just can someone repeat the bill number? It is HR 6201.
Correct.
Another question that came in, Joe, is the employee count for U.S.-based employees, or is it for global employees? So
U.S.-based employees.
Okay, thank you for that. Jen, you may want to talk to this, or Joe, you touched upon this, but what is our responsibility as employers if someone is sick but unable to work?
Yeah, so I think for the sick but unable to work, first off, if you're a company with an existing sick day policy, they should take a sick day, and again, look to your internal procedures. If you're sick and able to work from home, you could probably work from home and not take a sick day. And under this bill, it would mandate the 2 weeks of sick pay. So again, if the employee meets the criteria laid out there, which is, again, being subject to a quarantine, showing symptoms, trying to get a test, these are all things that would qualify under the bill. And I think the congressional intent is for it to be pretty expansive. Once you use up sick days, we would then look to using up vacation days and other things like that.
Okay. One other question that came through, is there a waiting period for collecting unemployment insurance? I think that's a moving target, right?
Yeah, there generally is. Again, this is a state-by-state analysis. There generally is a waiting period before you can put your claim in. Governor Baker has a proposal that would waive that.
Right. Jen, another question is, should we have to, can you please address how to best handle layoffs?
Sure. So we've been working with a number of groups, unfortunately, already on this. A layoff is the same in this scenario as any other. We need to make sure that we're paying the individuals up through the last, days worked within 24 hours and notifying them as early as possible. The WARN Act, we believe, does not have an effect on this. There's an exemption in there in the provision that says unforeseeable business circumstances. So we're waiting on interpretation for that. But if you're an employer over 100 employees, we don't believe that's going to be held in effect.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Michael, I think this is along the lines of what you could cover. We've seen many companies who already have the capabilities to move to a work-at-home structure, but how do you actually support telework if you don't do it today? And then I have a follow-up to that.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. So as Tom mentioned, many of our clients, already have capabilities to support remote work arrangements. However, those remote work arrangements may have historically only been for certain groups of individuals or certain individuals who had the capability to use the various systems that were available and exposed to remote work situations. So how do you get there if we end up in a situation where there's multiple weeks worth where you want to continue business as usual as much as possible? Fortunately, there are a few different ways to address this. The simplest and most reactive thing to do is look at your VPN capabilities. Assess them, determine whether or not you have enough capacity for all or most of your workers to be accessing systems remotely. The second is to look at some of the cloud-based technologies. If you've been holding off on migrating certain portions of your business systems to the cloud, this may be a great time to look at that with greater focus. A third is to explore some of the virtual desktop infrastructure capabilities that exist. And instead of having individuals running applications directly on their local machine, provision remote virtual environments that they connect through. The benefit of this approach is that it significantly reduces typically the amount of bandwidth that's being consumed to access those remote systems, as most of the processing and data transmission happens in that remote environment. There are a number of technologies that have been made available in this space that are easily deployed in a cloud infrastructure, reducing your need for more on-premises servers and capability. So that's something that can certainly you'll be looked at and implemented in short order to support more remote work users.
Mike, you talked about, or you alluded to this, but a specific question is there something out there that can quickly get us up on this telework infrastructure?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, from a VPN perspective, there are some cloud-based VPN providers that don't require a significant amount of on-premises infrastructure, that have some great capacity and can be used in this situation. And then there are some of the cloud vendors like Microsoft that have some virtual desktop infrastructures that can be deployed very quickly.
I'm sure people could reach out to you directly if they need more detail on that.
Absolutely.
Follow-up question, how can we monitor our remote users to ensure appropriate productivity?
Yeah, so this is a double-sided question. Certainly you don't want to start, injecting, new ways of thinking about your employees. Trust is always an important component of any business. That said, it may be hard to judge and assess, whether or not folks are, being productive when they're not in the office. So our general perspective on this is first and foremost to work with the employee, put together, have them define a process and approach for how they are going to measure their own productivity and use that as a starting point. Should it come to it, there are some technologies that are available from a number of providers that can be deployed to end user workstations that do allow for the remote monitoring of activity. So while productivity should be measured as an outcome, if there is a need to get a bit more focused on individual users, those technologies are available.
Thank you, Michael. And then last question on the technology side, how can we access our business systems that run on site if we have to work remotely?
Right. So this speaks more to a question of not the typical end user, but more your IT staff. If folks need to physically be on site to handle the day-to-day, then how do they do that? If you have not already, we would recommend working with your IT department to make sure they have the appropriate technologies in place from a variety of the vendors, the uninterruptible power supply, ensuring that the features are turned on and enabled that most of them have that allow for remote power up and power down. The same thing with any of the servers in that infrastructure, the switches, the routers, firewalls, and so forth. Most of the the current state of these technologies allow for remote access and management, making sure that those features are properly enabled. At the same time, I think it's important to point out that we shouldn't just be opening everything else up, and we need to make sure that when we are making any of these changes to our environments allowing remote access, that we're doing so with security in mind, because that's an area that we don't want to compromise on as we allow more and more people to access things remotely.
Okay. I'm going to just revert back. I'm sorry, was that David? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna, make some comments there. Michael opened up and mentioned security, and that's obviously a major concern. It's right now in this rapidly changing time and environment, it's very easy for people to get into a reactionary mode and think, about what you need to do right here, right now, with what you have. And we do see clients making mistakes, strategic mistakes or security mistakes, with the opening up access to everybody, or have everybody just work from home using their home computers. We have VPN, and if I give everybody access to install the VPN client to their home computers, then they can just VPN from home from their personal machine. I mean, these are not good security decisions to make at this point in time. And so it's really important to keep in mind that operations are important, security it also remains important, and to sort of strike that proper balance between the two when you're making these decisions.
Thank you, David. We're going to take I'm just going to revert back to some questions that are coming to us live from the audience, and these are, Jen, you may or may not be able to answer this. The first is, what if the state mandates a shutdown? What would be our business's responsibility for paying employees?
We are actually waiting on interpretation regarding that. At this time, I don't have a response for that.
Okay, so we'll certainly keep that question and get guidance out to you as we receive it. Next question, in Massachusetts, we're able to combine sick time and PTO. If we have PTO, up to 2 weeks, is that sufficient with the new bill? Joe, is that something you can answer, or is that something we'll need more time to look at?
My first response would be it depends on your policy. So you always want to coordinate your policy. If you have a policy that they have earned or accrued time, you can certainly pay that out.
Yeah, I would agree. Only adding that the bill is mandating sick pay where it didn't exist before. So if you're saying, well, my sick pay is my PTO, I'm not quite sure if that's a good response.
Okay, thanks. This one really goes out to, I think, Michael and Frank, and certainly you, Jeff. What are the security implications that should be considered with my workforce working remotely? And I think David touched on some of this, but Mike, maybe from just purely a technology standpoint, could you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo, a lot of what David said. If somebody has a PC at home, don't just move forward with, saying, yeah, use that to access our network resources. It's a device that, you don't have control over. So where possible, continue to recommend that employees take, their laptop home with them and focus on that. That the importance of not sacrificing security of your environment could lead to way more significant issues than some lost productivity.
Yeah, that's a good one to follow up on. Frank Rudowitz, from a fraud standpoint, any comments?
I think it's complementary what Dave and Michael talked about. We're talking about individuals, our employees, that are now leaving the workforce to go to a remote spot. They're concerned, they're in fear, they don't know what the future holds. And we want to make sure that we understand what potential things are going on in their lives. So the question is, in any other environment, do we really know what's going on with individuals' employees' lives? Do they have financial problems? Have they been looking around to leave your employment? Are they disgruntled? Is there a way for us to find that out? For two reasons. One, for a fraud preventative, so you can have some extra scrutiny and oversight. Or two, if it's something that you could take care of as the employer, there might be a simple solution. An example is, oftentimes when we look at a workflow analysis to determine what employees actually have access to and need access to in their workplace, after an event, we find out that certain employees had additional access that we weren't aware of. The employer wasn't aware of, because they granted it during, a short period of time because they were the trusted employees. For us to monitor and be aware of that and address it as they're now working from home. Secondly, on the physical security protocols, is to reinforce the best practices that we do in our corporate headquarters. Things like, and the best example is trash protocols. If they don't have a shredder at home, they may be more apt to take confidential documents and other sensitive documents and throw them in the trash as they work. We need to reinforce those protocols either by giving them the wherewithal or making sure that they withhold any trash and arrange for some type of pickup of confidential items. If there are concerns about, and if they already have in place, Michael mentioned this remote monitoring. If there is, for example, already remote monitoring of certain conversations, keywords and the like that your company has in place now, you may want to look at that to expand that monitoring to make sure you have that oversight.
Thank you, Frank. And Jeff, some thoughts on this?
Sure. I just want to add a couple things to what Frank was discussing, which is he mentioned the physical documents. On the cyber side, I'm actually more concerned about the electronic documents and information. And one of the things that we need to be careful of is what access employees have to company data, and particularly if they're going to be working at home, can they extract information from the central systems and work on them at home remotely on their computers, which means and suggests that they now have copies of data on their home computers. And so we just need to think about those types of risks and issues so that we can monitor and maintain that, you know, we're not allowing employees to take confidential information and bring it home on home computers in particular, or work on them as copies on their company computers. Tom, just another component, Michael and David had also mentioned, you know, VPN, virtual private network access. Without a doubt, VPNs are extremely important to have in place. I would also mention that making sure that you're using something called multi-factor authentication, which authenticates the person on the other end that they truly are an employee of the firm, is really important. And if you're not using VPN, some folks may have attempted to implement, I call it remote control, or products like GoToMyPC or TeamViewer, which allows you to take control of the computer in the office and work at home. And my concern, or security concern actually, is that we need to make sure that we maintain a good level of security with GoToMyPC or TeamViewer, and making sure that you've implemented dual password authentication helps to promote and enhance that security to put in place. So those are a couple things to think about. On a social engineering perspective, on a cyber front, undoubtedly we're going to be in a situation where someone's going to forget or forget their password, or key in their password incorrectly multiple times, and now their password needs to be reset. And so we're going to have to figure out how the IT department is going to be able to respond to them to reset their passwords. But equally important in that discussion is, how do we ensure that the person who's reaching out to IT is actually the employee of the company to reset the password for, and not an attacker of some, not an attacker. And so I think, what businesses need to do is figure out that connection or the authentication that they're going to be put in place to ensure and make sure that an employee is actually an employee. And it might be as simple as we have their home phone number, and we actually pick up the phone and we call the employee to validate that indeed that is the employee who's making that request. So that's something to really think about. And the last point about social engineering, we're starting to see it, but it's going to get much worse, which would be the COVID-19 phishing attacks. There's going to be more and more of it. It's going to get really bad over the next couple of weeks. So let's just make sure our employees know that phishing is bad, but it's going to get worse, and just to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. You said quite a bit and talked about some resources that are out there. I should have mentioned this earlier. Each one of the speakers today, full bios are available on our website, as is their contact information. So should you have follow-up questions that are very specific to your organization, we would welcome you to reach out to any one of the of the individuals that's speaking today, or certainly myself, should you have other questions or need other professional advice. Okay, this is a big one, Frank Rudowitz. I'd like you to try to address this. Does my insurance cover damages to my business?
Yeah, so this is now getting to the point of, okay, we've had some losses, and are they covered? This goes to your property insurance, commercial insurance, and it really is a question of, do you have business interruption and contingent business interruption coverage? The best way to ascertain that, obviously, is to check with your broker and your attorney. We are in uncharted waters. There will be many conventional coverage items tested to decide whether you're covered or not. Conventional theory has been that business interruption covers loss of income, sales, things like that, due to damage to property that's covered under the policy. There's a typical meaning that it has to be a physical event to have this covered cause of loss. There might be exclusions on that side of it, but they'll all be listed in the policy and the period of restoration in that policy. However, it's a common misconception is that only direct physical loss of property can be covered as property damage. And that's where you need the interaction with your broker and your attorney and other advisors because many jurisdictions have already held that contamination and other incidents like that that render a property uninhabitable or otherwise unfit for intended use is property damage. So in this case, considering that we also have some civil authority authorization to close certain businesses, that is also covered with many policies. The contingent business insurance policy basically covers your suppliers, your customers, your vendors. If they have a loss that interrupts your business, and that loss would have been covered in your policy for a similar event, then contingent business interruption covers it. Example, you need certain supplies, your supplier cannot deliver them because of their shutdown. You would be covered if you have the contingency policy in place. So now I'll just follow that up and keep going is, what do you do now to prepare for this? The business interruption claim is going to assess how you looked before the event and what did you lose during and after the event. A typical claim in certain areas of the country involves, say, hurricanes. You assess what your business was prior to the hurricane. You have an interruption during the event, and then you assess what your business is after the claim. And your period of restoration is what you lost in between. In this case, I think it's more going to be towards a situation like Katrina. You won't have, or we won't know exactly what the period of restoration is because it may continue for a long time. What we do in preparation for that is right now begin to keep every record before the event. We have a benefit that this is not a physical event, so to speak, like a flood, a hurricane, where records may be lost. we now start to calculate what our sales were, what our out-of-pocket expenses are, so that we can recreate what the sales and income was prior to this event. And then, depending how long, there might be different modeling to be used to estimate what your losses are that hopefully are covered.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Frank, we have a question here on predatory lending. I don't know if that's something, asking for examples of what, have we been experiencing that, what it might look like. I don't know if that's something that you might be able to cover, or whether we should answer that offline for this particular person.
Predatory lending?
Yeah, in general, just lending organizations and potentially, things that people should be looking out for.
Well, I think there's going to the fraud side, or there are going to be actors out there that are going to take advantage of the situation. If they are legitimate licensed organizations, then a reporting aspect to government regulators to have them look into it. The dilemma for many businesses are going to be, if they don't feel that they have another recourse and they need this money, is this the only place they can get it? That unfortunately is a reality. There's going to have some bad credit out there. They may not be able to qualify for certain government programs, so they turn to the individuals that are taking advantage of the credits.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate that. Frank Nemia, again, Frank runs our risk advisory practice. Some general questions came across to us as it relates to just overall protection of businesses' infrastructure. And then a follow-up to that was, how should they be working with their current supply chain, their suppliers, to kind of ensure that they are doing what they need to do so that they can continue, I can continue my business operations. So two separate questions, but maybe you could address the first on infrastructure.
Well, I think, and good morning, everyone. I think, when we look at the infrastructure itself, especially around the supply chain, I think when we look at the industries themselves, in the not-for-profit, it may be a question of being able to get everyone home and being able to work from home. But if you get into the manufacturing and distribution, the question is, how do you manage that? And obviously, at this point, many of the people that are probably listening in have already invoked their continuity plans. But not to restate the obvious, it's important that as you're looking at your reputational risk, that this is a crisis that's going to pass, but the memories are going to linger in terms of your communication plan and how you've established, the ability to talk to both your customers and your suppliers in terms of being able to manage the flow of goods. When we think about the ability to look at, even from a distribution standpoint of your warehouses and where you needed to get product out, how you're managing your resources and your people, not only in terms of educating them specifically around how they are taking care of themselves, but being able to ensure relief in the event that they did get sick, and how you were able to replace them in order to be able to maintain, your own supply chain and being able to get your product out to your customers. There are going to be a lot of people right now that, quite frankly, are looking for, because of many of the retailers that have closed down, and similar to what Amazon did in terms of bringing in more people, paying extra bonuses, you might be looking at different ways to be able to make sure that you have your own supply chain of resources that are going to be able to help you manage getting that product out. Your ability to be able to communicate with your suppliers and to determine the level and extent by which you know that your critical product can get in to your either manufacturing and or your distribution centers is going to be important. Again, it's a matter of that communication and any ability to identify and prioritize the suppliers from the critical products in terms of how you're servicing and creating the services that you need to is also going to be important. So it's a matter of making sure that from a supply chain standpoint, your communication lines have been set up. You've been able to triage it in terms of how you're going to get the product in, whether or not there's been an impact from the international side or whether or not it's local or nationally, and how you're capable of being able to make sure that you are keeping your customers abreast of what you're capable of being able to distribute to them and doing it in a way that if it is a question of rationing it, that you're doing it in a way that you're feeling that you're keeping your reputational reputation intact in terms of being able to service as many as you can as practically as you can.
Thank you, Frank.
If I could add, Tom, it's Frank. One other concept that should be considered in certain circumstances in the event that you are having trouble getting product out the door or supplies in because of your vendors and suppliers is considering emergency cooperation agreements. These are agreements with your competitors. You agree under an emergency situation that certain services would be provided by your competitor. A good example might be a medical provider that has to outsource some patient care because of a shutdown. These things work in the concept that if you have a friendly competitor out there where you have some respect and then you put some legal framework around it, such as addressing confidential information, non-competes, non-solicitation. This may be your best alternative if you have suppliers and vendors that can't meet your demand.
Thank you, Frank. That was helpful. I think Jared, any additional questions? There was one question that came across relative to small business loan updates here in Connecticut. As I mentioned, I think earlier, there has been some movement on that. We're waiting to hear from our group here on the summary. Once I get that over, we'll certainly get that out to all of our Connecticut clients. So that'll be coming in the way of an email. I want to thank everyone for their time today. We, on behalf of all of us here at Bloom Shapiro, we just wish you the very best as we collectively kind of go through this crisis that's in front of us. We'll do our part to continue to look for ways to communicate to you on a timely basis as it relates to business matters and appropriate employee matters. As we get it, again, we'll disseminate it to you. So everyone, please stay safe, and we look forward to touching base with you on an ongoing basis. Have a good day.